Okay, now that we've set our metadata and we're back in our workflow ready to run Autospill. As a reminder, the first part of this workflow that goes from the root through compensation and scaling is just our general normal cytometry workflow. In this case, compensation is actually just an empty matrix, which is why we're going to be using Autospill to calculate it. We'll come back to that later. The second branch here of scaling followed by create com matrix is the canonical way of calculating a compensation matrix, but we don't have to do that in this case because we're going to use Autospill instead. And so technically the scaling wasn't necessary just to use this step, but just for good measure, we are doing it in the proper way. So to run Autospill, there's really two options for how to do it. The first option is we want to do it directly off the workflow root because we're just taking the raw data and we're giving it to Autospill. So I'll demonstrate that first. Now that we're in the Autospill task, we can configure it. And the first thing that we need to do is select the files that will be included in the task. Now, you could obviously do this just by shift-clicking or singly clicking however you want. Another good option is you can type in die, and then that might just bring up all the beads here, but you could also do not, which is the exclamation mark, and then NA. And not NA will give us anything that has something actually set for a die control. So I'll select those. The next option is to select the features that will be included in the com matrix, and these should be the ones that are associated with these bead files. You can choose these manually, or what we can do is also leverage, again, a trick using the create comp matrix task here. We can go in there again, open up our channel selector, and then just click the copy button. And then we'll go back to Autospill and we'll just paste. So that saves us a little bit of time. The next thing that we need to decide is the actual Autospill settings. The first one of which is determining if you want to allow Autospill to do some automatic pre-gating on the scatter channels. The point of that is, whether you have beads or cells, you probably have debris and unwanted events that you don't want to include in the Autospill calculation. Autospill has its own method of gating those out. And so I'll demonstrate that here. And because I'm choosing this, what I need to do is actually add the forward scatter and side scatter parameters that Autospill will be using to do that basic gating step. You don't have to allow Autospill to do that basic gating step, in which case we would have to do our own gating, most likely, and then provide that clean data to Autospill using the typical pattern of gating followed by subsampling, which I'll loop back on a little bit later. We also want to choose the level of diagnostic output. If you just care about getting your results, then you can choose minimal. But if you want to include a lot of different diagnostic plots and statistics, some of which you may understand and some of which you may not, but there's a lot to know about there, you can choose full. For a full explanation, you can read the documentation of all the diagnostics you can get. We also can specify fluorescence subtraction feature, in which case we'd have to have an extra parameter here, and then we could choose it here, more info in the documentation there. But for now, I'm fully configured and I can just go ahead and run this. The alternative strategy that I could have taken for running this, like I said, is our first task could be gating, in which case I could draw my own cleanup gate. And I'll skip making sure that it's applied in the correct position for all files, but probably it is. Now that I've put that cleanup gate in place, I need to, of course, choose subsampling, and we'll choose that cleanup gate, and we'll just take a max out of it. And then what I could do is run my Autospill after this. For convenience, I'll just take the same settings from here and paste them down here. And so this would be Autospill based on the cleanup subsampling. And of course, I would want to turn off the pre-gating because I handled it on my own. And now that I don't have pre-gating, I also don't need to include the forward and side scatter. And then I can just run this.